Dennis and the Little Western. Dennis had been working on the island of Sodor for 3 years. He had developed a new attitude. He's far less lazy now and no longer makes excuses. He now tries to pull his weight and works happily at Knapford Yard as the new station pilot. The other engines respect him now. Even James and Fergus, who were usually skeptical of diesels, welcomed him as a part of the family. However, there were 3 engines that Dennis had a hard time getting along with, and their names were Donald, Douglas, and Oliver. When Dennis had first arrived on Sodor, he left his trucks behind at the junction of the Little Western. As a result, all trains had to be halted until the mess was cleared up. While Toad had forgiven Dennis right away, and Duck eventually forgave Dennis after he helped him and Gordon over the hill, the other 3 treated Dennis with deep suspicion, even though Dennis had apologized over and over again. It also didn't help that all 3 of them, including Duck, had bad experiences with diesels in the past. One day, Sir Topham Hatt came to see Dennis. "Duck is feeling ill," he said. "He needs to go to the works to have his worn parts mended. I need you to cover for him on the Little Western. Rosie will handle your work in the yard until Duck returns from the works." "Yes, sir," moaned Dennis. He wasn't looking forward to working alongside the Little Western engines, but he knew better than to argue with Sir Topham Hatt. Meanwhile, Duck was talking with the other engines before he left. "Do you really have to go?" asked Douglas. "Unfortunately so. But don't worry, Dennis will look after things while I'm gone." "And you trust him, after what he did on his first day?" "That was a long time ago, Donald. He's a different engine now." "And how do you know that? For all we know, the only reason he helped you and Gordon over the hill was so he could get praise and a new engine. I'm honestly surprised, Oliver. I remember you were the one who told me off for not trusting Emily when she first came to the island." "That was different, Duck. She didn't mean to take Thomas's coaches. Dennis intentionally left his trucks in the line so he could get out of work." "Oh, when are you 3 going to let that go? Not every diesel is a filthy, smoky monster. Some are nice. There's Boko and Daisy and Mavis and Salty, to name a few. They've helped us through many situations. Heck, look at Andy. He was much worse than Dennis when he first came here, and he's changed for the better. You don't even help to clear his name when that Dudley came to this railway. If Andy can change, why can't Dennis?" "Duck, we understand that there are nice diesels out there. There are even mean steamies out there." "Aye, but I'd never trust one myself." "What's your point?" "My point is, diesels have been on this railway for almost 2 decades, and everyone has learned to accept them. Even James learned to accept them. Why can't you 3? I'm wasting my puff. Just make sure to be civil with him." And with that, Neville came and took Duck to the works. That afternoon, Dennis arrived at Callan Station. The sun was shining brightly, birds were singing, and everything looked very cheerful. Dennis, however, didn't feel cheerful at all. Donald, Douglas, and Oliver were already at the station. They watched him carefully as he rolled in. "Well," muttered Donald, "here he is." "Aye," said Douglas, "the diesel." Oliver said nothing. Soon, Dennis collected Alice and Mirabel from the carriage sheds and shunted them to the platform. "Excuse me," he called politely. "Could one of you give me a push to get the train started?" The 3 engines exchanged looks. "A push?" scoffed Douglas. "Sounds like laziness to me," said Oliver. "Aye," added Donald firmly. "Duck never needed help with that train." Dennis felt his engine grow hot with embarrassment. I was only asking." "Well, don't!" snapped Oliver. The 3 engines puffed away, leaving Dennis alone. Dennis looked at the stubborn coaches. "Well," he said, "this may take a while." And it did. After much groaning, straining, slipping, and one particularly rude coach that bumped him harder than necessary, Dennis finally managed to start the train. Once moving, the coaches behaved perfectly. That evening, the engines returned to the sheds. Dennis rode quietly toward the large shed where Duck usually slept. He was shocked to find not only was Oliver in front of his berth, but he, Donald, and Douglas were glaring angrily at him. What do you think you're doing? Oliver asked sharply. Well, said Dennis nervously, Sir Topham Hatt said I was covering for Duck, so I thought— You thought you'd take Duck's berth? Donald interrupted. That's Duck's place. And until he comes back, added Douglas, it stays empty. You're not coming in here. Dennis looked down sadly. Very well, he said quietly. He rolled away without another word. Dennis decided to sleep at Oliver's shed at Callan. Toad was there. Cheer up, Mr. Dennis. Things aren't so bad as they seem, Toad said kindly. Dennis sighed. They hate me. Toad chuckled softly. They don't hate you. If they did, they wouldn't spend so much time thinking about you. They're frightened. Frightened? Asked Dennis. To lose Duck, said Toad gently. They care about him very much. Dennis thought about this. Well, he said slowly, I suppose I would feel the same way about my friends too. To prove yourself, said Toad wisely, all you must do is keep trying. Dennis smiled faintly. Thank you, Toad. Any time, said Toad cheerfully. Break fans are excellent listeners. Later that night in the main engine shed, Donald, Douglas, and Oliver were talking quietly. What if he does well? Said Oliver. Douglas looked uneasy. Aye, what if Sir Topham Hatt thinks he's better than Duck? Donald's face grew worried. He might send Duck away. To scrap, whispered Oliver. The three engines shuddered. No engine liked thinking about scrap. No, we can't let that happen, said Douglas. Donald frowned thoughtfully. Then we'll have to make sure that Diesel shows his true colors. This, as it turned out, was not a very good plan. The next morning, Oliver had an idea. Dennis arrived to collect some trucks from Augsburg Harbor, but Oliver had shunted a very long train of trucks for Dennis. He'll never manage that lot, Oliver muttered. Dennis backed down onto the trucks. Arthur and Oliver watched with interest. Dennis tried to set off, but his wheels began to spin. The train was terribly heavy. Oh dear, wailed Dennis. These trucks are heavier than I thought. But then he remembered Toad's advice, so he pulled carefully, steadily, and patiently, until at last the train started to move. Unbelievable, called Arthur from nearby. Well done, Dennis. That's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Oliver couldn't believe what he was seeing. Oh no, he cried. Instead of making Dennis look bad, I did the exact opposite, and now he's more appreciated than ever. Douglas decided he would try next. When Dennis arrived to collect his passenger train, Douglas asked one of the foremen to quietly disconnect the brake pipe between the coaches. That'll stop him, Douglas chuckled. Dennis started the train, but he quickly noticed the problem. He said thoughtfully. Dennis's driver carefully checked the train and reconnected the pipe himself. Soon the train was running perfectly. The passengers praised Dennis for being so careful. Douglas groaned. Another failure, he muttered. Donald was growing impatient. If you want a job done right, he said grimly, do it yourself. That afternoon, Dennis was scheduled to take a ballast train down. Every wise engine knows that ballast trucks are the worst behaved trucks on the entire island. Donald shunted the train together for Dennis and secretly placed a faulty wagon in the middle of the train. The wagon had a badly cracked axle. That'll cause trouble, Donald muttered, but he knew that wasn't enough. Donald rolled slowly beside the trucks and spoke in a low voice. Listen here, he said. That Diesel will be taking you today. If he slows down, you give him a good shove.
A shove?
Giggled one truck.
A big shove,
sniggered another. Aye, said Donald darkly. Push him hard. Show everyone how useless he is. The trucks chattered excitedly.
Push the Diesel! Push the Diesel!
They chanted. Donald felt satisfied. Trucks were always eager to cause trouble. Soon Dennis arrived to collect the ballast train. He was coupled up and set off. Just after Augsburg West was a small slope. It wasn't as steep as Gordon's Hill, but it was still steep enough to cause a small runaway. As Dennis began to roll down the slope, the trucks saw their chance.
Push him now!
Cried one.
Shut the diesel!
Shouted another. Suddenly, the truck slammed into Dennis's buffers and surged him forward in surprise. "Hey!" he exclaimed. "Steady back there!" But the trucks were having too much fun.
Push him! Push him!
They chanted. They began bumping and shoving wildly. Dennis struggled to stay in control. "Stop it!" he shouted. Then... the faulty wagon's axle snapped. It derailed violently, nearly pulling the whole train off the track. Dennis slammed on his brakes. For a moment, everyone was silent. Then, one of the trucks whispered nervously,
I think we pushed him too hard.
Dennis was badly shaken. Workmen soon arrived and cleared the wreckage. Sir Topham Hatt came to inspect the line. "That was a very dangerous situation," he said gravely. Dennis said nothing. He simply finished his work quietly. Donald felt uneasy. "That nearly killed him," whispered Douglas. Oliver looked troubled. "Aye," said Donald softly. "It did." After their plans had failed, the three engines tried something else. "We'll show Sir Topham Hatt we're better workers than that diesel," said Oliver. So they worked harder than ever, perhaps a little too hard. Oliver pulled far more trucks than he should have. Douglas worked without resting, and Donald rushed his train so quickly that even his whistle sounded breathless. By the afternoon, one by one, they ground to a halt. "Oh no," groaned Oliver. "My valve gear's jammed." Just then, Dennis arrived. "Don't worry," he said kindly. "I'll help." Oliver didn't say anything. Dennis rolled up in front of Oliver and pulled away. They didn't get very far when they noticed a guard waving a red flag. "What happened?" asked Dennis. "Douglas's fireballs have collapsed. Could you shunt him to the next station?" "I'll try, sir." "This is embarrassing," muttered Douglas. As Dennis pushed Douglas and pulled Oliver, they came across Donald, whose injector had failed. Dennis buffered up behind Donald and pushed him, Douglas, and pulled Oliver all the way to Callan Station. It was hard work, but Dennis didn't give up. Sir Topham Hatt was very pleased, and for the first time, so were the three engines. A few days later, Duck returned from the works, looking bright and polished. He was delighted to see everyone, but when Toad quietly explained everything that had happened, he was furious. He rolled straight into the shed where Donald, Douglas, and Oliver were waiting. "I am ashamed of you three," Duck snapped. "You accused Dennis of being lazy, you tried to sabotage him, and you nearly got him killed. That is most certainly not the Great Western way." The three engines looked down at their buffers. "I've told you time and time again, Dennis has changed for the better, and after rescuing you when you broke down, I think you can see that." "Aye, we behaved badly," Douglas sighed. "Very badly," agreed Oliver. The next day, the three engines went to see Dennis. "We're sorry, Dennis," they said. Dennis smiled kindly. "That's all right." Duck chuckled. "Well," he said, "I think you finally learned something." "Aye," said Donald. "Diesel or steam, a good engine is a good engine." Douglas finished. At long last, Dennis set off back to the yards. The four engines wished Dennis a goodbye and wished he would return someday. Dennis hoped so too.